Well, there are two interesting teachings in the Jewish tradition that have to do with our birth. In both of them, we're told that an angel instructs us at birth, before we're born, before we're about to come into this world, that an angel instructs us. Bless you. And in one teaching, we're told that an angel teaches us Torah, teaches us basically the Bible, before we're born, and teaches us in the womb the entire time we're in the womb. And in many scriptural traditions, there's a lectionary, meaning the scripture is parsed out to be read over an entire year. And so, interestingly, if you're being instructed in scripture in the womb, you're only getting 9 months of the 12. And so that's one interesting teaching, that we're instructed in 9 months of scripture, of a year's worth of scripture in the womb. And then that same angel, just as we're about to be patted on the bum and launched out of the womb, strikes us with a sword right at the mouth, which is the source of the cleft that's little right here at our lips, and we forget everything that we were taught. In a parallel teaching, we're instructed before we are born by an angel, and the angel says this: we're administered an oath. We're administered an oath. And the oath is this: be righteous and be not wicked, but even if the whole world tells you that you are righteous, consider yourself wicked. This is the oath that we take. Be righteous, be not wicked, but even if the whole world tells you that you're righteous, consider yourself wicked. And then the sword strikes you on the mouth, and you forget your oath. The forgetting is interesting. What would be the purpose of that? What would be the purpose of being instructed in Scripture for 9 months and then forgetting it? Taking an oath, which is considered very important, and then forgetting it. There's some understanding that you forget it consciously, but it remains installed as an oath, as knowledge. And with regard to the teachings, with regard to Scripture, this teaching is often called the Torah of the 9 months, the teaching of the 9 months, because Torah means teaching or instruction. And the Torah of the 9 months is this: that whatever you were instructed in over those 9 months, those are the things that you come into the world basically understanding. You get it. You hear it again, and you kind of nod your head. Oh, yeah. Your challenge in life is everything you didn't get the other 3 months. And that's where the work is for you. You have this installed software that has to do with 9 months of knowledge, and you'll do all right with that. But it's not where your spiritual work is. Your spiritual work is everything you don't get, and especially everyone that you don't get. The people that you clash with, that you don't quite vibe with, that you have to learn to understand. And I think that's an important teaching. I learned this teaching from Reb Zalman, my Rebbe, my master. I suppose that's a weird sort of word today. My master. But sometimes in a classroom, he would stand everybody up. Just make a circle. And everybody would stand and get in a circle like this one. And it may be 20 people, 20, 30 people in the classroom. And he would say, now organize yourself according to your birth date. So I'm August 2nd, and the other August people would be in, and go around. And then he would walk to the center of the circle, or actually he was in August, so he was always over here next to me. It was August 17th. And he might come into the circle and say, now you're organized according to the astrological chart, or something like that. And he said, now look across from you. You're used to thinking of that person as your astrological opposite. He says, but really they're your astrological complement. They know what you don't know, and you need one another. And likewise, you know what they don't know. We need one another. And it's all about the framing of how we encounter the world. We're used to thinking in terms of affinities, and affinities are what is correct and good for us. But on the spiritual path, it's the things that you struggle with. Is where the good is, where the treasure is, the things that need to be claimed. Unless somehow you've been put out of sorts with your own kind of natural affinity, that can also happen. And then you have to claim that. But often the case is needing to claim what seems opposed to us and what we seem to not like. And that's where the work is. So that was just arising in me today. I think it's an interesting teaching. But to go back to the other thing that we've forgotten, but which we know. We know, but which we've forgotten. Be righteous, and be not wicked. And even if the whole world tells you that you are righteous, then consider yourself wicked. Seems to have an interesting relationship maybe to a discussion we were having yesterday about the enlightened being. Again, I don't think in those terms. I'm not so sure how helpful a concept that is, the enlightened being. I think I believe in enlightening, but not enlightenment. I like to stay with the verb. Enlightening is available. We can continually shed light on the material of our understanding in our lives. Enlightenment seems like a fixed thing. It's a noun. I don't know so much about that. I don't have experience of it. I've seen amazing beings who've been enlightened again and again and again. But in that discussion, the righteous in Hebrew would be called a tzaddik. A tzaddik. And you can see some relationships between words in Hebrew. Tzedakah. Tzedakah is how you say charity, but it means righteousness. You know, the giving of that gift to the person that needs it is a righteous act. It's righteousness, tzedakah, and that becomes the word for charity. And a person who is righteous is a tzaddik. In the Hasidic tradition of Judaism, there's a complicated discussion of the tzaddik. The tzaddik does not think of themselves as righteous. In fact, they're the one person that knows that they're not righteous, even when others think that they're righteous. They're the one that knows they're not righteous. And that's how they're righteous. Does that make sense, in a way? And so it's a really important teaching. And it's kind of what's being said here. Be righteous, be not wicked, but even if the whole world tells you that you're righteous, know that you're not. And that's administered to every one of us. Every one of us. And then we're struck on the mouth, we fall into forgetfulness, and yet it's resident. Somewhere under the layers is this knowing which speaks to us about how to be righteous, to be not wicked, and not to think of ourselves as righteous, lest we become wicked. But the Jewish tradition, much like the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, is a commentarial tradition. It has base teachings that it's constantly hovering around and exploring and unfolding and re-exploring, going back to the source, checking back against. And these kinds of traditions have to reconcile themselves with other authoritative statements, and they have to make them work together. So we have this one. I'll keep repeating it because this is how you do it in the Jewish tradition. Be righteous, be not wicked, and even if the whole world tells you that you're righteous, know that you're not. Or, as it actually says, see yourself as wicked. Rasha, the word for wicked. Another kind of word we don't use much anymore, unless you're from Boston. In which case it's good. It's usually applied as in a positive way. So you have that statement, and in the Jewish tradition we have to accept that statement as authoritative. That's what we need to be, that's what we're told. And yet there's another authoritative statement within the Jewish tradition that says, do not see yourself as wicked. Be righteous, be not wicked. Even if the whole world tells you that you're righteous, see yourself as wicked. And then another authoritative text says, do not see yourself as wicked. The reason we're told that you should not see yourself as wicked, and this will follow in that same text, is because when you see yourself as wicked, the tendency is to fall into despair. You know, the person that sees themselves as wicked is often defeated by that view of themselves and loses the ability to lift themselves up. I'm bad. So you're badding yourself again and again. I'm bad, I'm wrong, I'm bad, I'm wrong. And by constantly naming yourself that, you remain in that space. It does not say that you become bad or wrong, but you become depressed and can't rise to do the things that are righteous because you've fallen into this depression. So the tradition tells us these two opposite things. Even if the whole world tells you that you're righteous, see yourself as wicked, but do not see yourself as wicked. So we're faced with this difficulty. What does it mean? And so we have to reconcile the apparent opposites in the tradition. And the way they're reconciled is how we've been speaking. The tzaddik, the person that is truly righteous, knows that they're not. And in fact, thinks that they're wicked. So, in what way do they think that they're wicked? You know, what is the manner of that awareness as opposed to the person that has fallen in depression and cannot do a righteous act? I'm open to suggestions.
I was thinking as you were talking about Rory's teachings on the Dark Knight, especially in that second round, where you taught that you face the person, the worst possible version of yourself that you can be, and you know the exact extent to the maximum of the damage that it is possible for you to do. So you are face to face eventually, if you go down that path, with your own potential for evil. Yeah. And so it seems like this teaching is naming that potential, that you continue to keep yourself humble by naming that potential, continuing to see what is possible for you to do just by virtue of being a human, and knowing that, like, and to keep that in your mind enough so that you can act outside of that, and so that you can, like, still be the good that you can be, because that is also possible. But to remain humble in that is to not lose sight of what of your potential for evil, and making sure that you're not following that.
Very nicely said. Very nicely said.
In regard to the second one, I was thinking in terms of self-absorption, that that depression, that thinking that you're bad over and over, it doesn't allow you to see anything beyond yourself.
Yeah, yeah. It is also an egotism. Yeah. A wounded self-image of that sort can be just as big an ego as the braggart seems to have. We privilege the braggart in terms of egotism for obvious reasons. But a person like me knows, who had a lot of anxiety and a lot of poor self-image, became aware over time that that was just as big an ego. And it was just as much in the way of the work and responsibilities I had to do in this life. As Leia's bringing up, you know, this is all a consciousness game. When I was reading about Jung early in my intellectual life, and he would bring up often the confrontation with the unconscious. The confrontation with the unconscious. It sounded really serious. I mean, he put it in a framework where his very life seemed to be on the line, certainly his sanity, in this confrontation with the unconscious, especially as he's talking about just pre-World War I for himself. Pre-World War I, he's having this confrontation with the unconscious in which everything is on the line and there may be no more him. And he feels his very being is at risk. And I understood the words that I was reading, but I don't think I knew what he meant. What could be so serious? It seemed like a good intellectual exercise, a good exploration of your own depths. What was the risk? What was this tremendous risk that he was taking that put everything on the line? I took him seriously, but I couldn't understand it. I think until it happened to me. You know, and this is a reference back to the Dark Knight as Roy's presenting it. I don't know how this happens for anybody else. You know, Jung has descriptions of his own experience. And maybe this is the same thing, and maybe it's not the same thing. And I think I could frame it as a powerful psychological awareness of my own capacity for being my opposite. But only the opposite of what I think I am, or what I want myself to be, or how I perceive myself to be, my self-concept, my identity as I understand it. And then to be confronted with my opposite in the mirror and know it is me, risked my sanity. Yeah, I don't want to put it in too extreme terms, but it felt like it felt like my life was on the line. And in a way it is, because these identities that we live by, we're leaning on them very heavily. Not just crutches, it's like a singular crutch. You're standing in that identity and defending it to orient yourself in the world. And especially if it involves a high ideal, or you believe yourself to be good. The confrontation with your potential for being not good is terrifying. And we use a word like potential, which abstracts, seems to pull us out of the experience. In the experience, you know yourself to not be good. If we use the Latin en potentia, or we use the Latin posse, possibility. As an ontological category, as a category of being, possibility exists. It exists. Because it can exist, it does exist. And what you get to see in a moment like that is that it exists, and it exists in you, and it exists in everyone. And it undermines your construct about yourself. And that's why it feels like your life is on the line, because you've identified your life with the construct. And so, inasmuch as you're identified with the construct, your life is on the line. And some people run from this confrontation, they withdraw from it. Some people don't survive it. When you survive it, the opposite gets integrated. Slowly, painfully, but it gets integrated. And I think the important aspect of this for the discussion that we're having, or at least the one I'm forcing you into, around be righteous, be not wicked, and even if the whole world tells you that you're righteous, see yourself as wicked. But do not see yourself as wicked, because you may fall into depression. Maybe it's like this. We witness our wickedness. We know it's true. We know it's in us. It becomes integrated. And because it's integrated and conscious, you're less capable of the wickedness, or less likely to act on it. But when you're in your identity as righteous, and many wicked people see themselves as righteous, do they not? I mean, I think this is a known. People tend to think of their ways as right and good, even when it's obvious to everyone else that they're not. Especially when you see yourself as right or good, or identify with the good, by a kind of psychological principle, you're more capable of acting badly. Because the reality of your unconscious motives and all the things that you cannot factor and will not factor are driving from behind. It's almost like we become like this is the exterior of a puppet. And the unconscious reaches through, puts itself into the puppet hands, occupies the mask, and drives from behind. Precisely because we're identified with the good. But when we own our opposite, it's in a way in front of us. We're aware of it. And being aware of it, we can actually make conscious decisions around it. And so it makes wickedness less likely. It's an amazing thing. And also allows a lot of compassion for why we're so mixed up a lot of the time. But I think it reconciles a lot of this teaching. The only way to be righteous is to know that you're not. The real basis of restorative justice is knowing that we are all capable of all of the awful things. And until you know that, you can't believe in restorative justice at the level it needs to be believed in. And it doesn't mean that we have to treat all those situations as equal, or that it should look exactly the same. But we have to believe in a kind of redemption for everything, or else we will never be redeemed ourselves. We'll always be excluding ourselves or someone else from restoration, from redemption. I take these teachings as wisdom traditions. You know, it's funny when you have traditions like this in a religious tradition, and the tradition says, accept this. But from a philosophical standpoint, you want to say, well, why should I accept that? But the way wisdom is imparted is just the way we've gotten it. You know? Okay, an angel tells us, be righteous, be not wicked, you know, and the whole thing. And we struggle with what that means. But is it logical? Do I believe in angels? I don't know if angels exist. I don't know that I was instructed in that. I'm pretty sure there's another explanation for this little part in my mustache, you know. What it is, I don't know, though, actually. And, you know, why should a righteous person, if they're actually righteous, think that they're wicked? And so it's interesting how wisdom is held in a tradition and passed on without trying to convince you, because it doesn't use logic. It used tradition as a vehicle to impart something. And even the way we've discussed it here is largely anecdotal. By appeal to experience and witness of ourselves and others, we're testifying to the truth of what wisdom passed down to us. It's not necessarily logical, but it feels true. So this is an interesting non-rational, to go back to our discussion before. And maybe we can only be convinced of the truth of this by experience. By having made mistakes, by having learned from mistakes, and at different levels, because you know, I think we put this, you know, the Jungian confrontation with the unconscious at some sort of ultimate level. and maybe it is, but that confrontation is on daily. How vulnerable we make ourselves to it on a daily basis, how often it comes up and at what level, I think it does. And as human beings, we tend to expand or contract around these particular moments. Contracted would be contracted consciousness, meaning I'm being confronted with something, I'm actually going to double down on what I already think. I'm going to back up into that identity even a little harder. And we contract, we get smaller. Or when confronted with something uncomfortable, inconvenient, but which is speaking something that is connecting, that is making us uncomfortable and we want to back away, if we come forward and embrace it, we expand. We get bigger, in a way. And not in an egoic sense. In fact, there's a way in which we become less material, more diffuse, bigger that way, can absorb more. That, in a way, is my spiritual practice today. We were having a discussion at breakfast about, Alan Watts' daughter said he didn't meditate, right? She saw what she saw, and she interpreted what she saw. And I'm not saying she was incorrect. At some phase of his life, Alan Watts certainly meditated. What his practice looked like by the time she was growing up may not have looked like straight zazen. And our practice changes over time. What I still do regular practices, but what I see as the core of my practice is allowing more and more. And being curious. I'm more and more curious about my own reactivity. And where there's reactivity, I know there's work. That's of my 3 months that I didn't get instructed in in the womb. The places of my reactivity I treat as of my 3 months and the things that I need to know. And I embrace it because I want to translate that reactivity into responsiveness. I'm curious why I'm stuck. I don't want to be a contracted being. I want to be a bigger being. And so those very places, those are the places I go into, and that is a lot of my practice today. It's just this curiosity, and we might just call it contemplative life. And I think that's where the practice always was, even if we did more disciplined bodily activities to make us vulnerable to certain states of awareness. And I think that that's still valuable. It doesn't become less valuable. But it also entrains a mind of awareness that you can take anywhere. So I want to bring this to where I intended to start, and I'll end with where I intended to start. What was actually on my notes was a fairly simple way of framing things in the world, but I think it makes more sense framed by what we've just said about who we're trying to be in the world and how we need to be in the world. In the same body of teachings, the Alter Rebbe, the master that I'm quoting through most of this, Not Carl Jung, I was also quoting Carl Jung, who I think is also a master. But the Alter Rebbe speaks of the garments of the soul. In Hebrew, levushim. A levush is a garment, much as a shirt, and pants, are garments. And he talks about the garments of the soul. And this is a helpful framing. He says there are 3 garments of the soul. I'll give you the Hebrew: makshava, dibur, and ma'aseh. Makshava, thought, is a garment of the soul. Dibur, the word, is a garment of the soul. Ma'aseh, action or deeds. Thought, word, and deed are how we clothe our soul. The soul, he says, if you use that word, nefesh, is in an ultimate sense identical with God. The soul is ultimately ontologically identical with God. And in Kabbalah, we call that yechida, that level of the soul that is identical with God, which means one, unified, yechida. And he says, so when we talk about garments of the soul, the way you clothe the soul, and that soul is identical with God, this is how you're dressing God in the world. You're dressing God with certain thoughts, certain words, and certain actions. And he's even graphic at one point. He says, imagine how often you've put God's head in the toilet. With the quality of thoughts that you've had or the actions that you've done. You don't even have to take God there. If we had enough respect and love for our own bodies and beings, and we think about some of the places we've taken our bodies and beings. And if you don't have tears for that, I don't know how you're going to have tears for God. For having taken God there, for the inherent sacredness of this flesh that we were given, and these precious lives and precious hearts, and how we've responded to some of those shaping forces. And this is not to kick us for what we've done. It's a world we're responding to, and we weren't necessarily given enough wisdom or giving the best environments to learn in. Sometimes we're given very difficult environments to learn in. Nevertheless, however we got to those places that have made us feel sullied, which I think is a kind of good word for some of the feelings that we have, make us feel sullied or besmirched, dirty sometimes, some of the experiences. We should have a lot of love for the person that experienced that. And in that kind of loving compassion for how we feel about that, we can then begin to take responsibility, a sacred responsibility for what it is to have such a body and such a being, and say, how would I have it dressed? How do I want to take care of it? How do I want to feed it? Now, he's putting this on the level of God, 200 years ago, because that seemed more important to his hearers. I don't know that it's more important than what we do to ourselves as apparently limited individuals. But it puts thought, word, and deed in a different framework. We tend to be in relationship to our thoughts passively. Thoughts are just things that I have. But how's it said if you go to confession, if you're Catholic, and you went to confession, and you say, Father, I had impure thoughts. What is said back? Does anybody know? Did you entertain them? Impure thoughts is just a thing. It's just a thing. They come unbidden. Unbidden. Impure thoughts, whatever those might be. In Hebrew, they're called makshavat sarot, alien thoughts, strange thoughts. And they're of all sorts. They come unbidden. It's actually a very intelligent question that the priest asks back. Did you entertain them? Because that's the only thing you're responsible for. Not whether you had them, whether you made them welcome. Sit down and stay. Let me get you something. Which we also do with our strange thoughts, which come unbidden. We make them too comfortable. And by cozying up to them, we sometimes get sullied. When actually, they're the very thing that we have a conscious decision to make about. Whether we entertain such thoughts, whether we give them room. And it's often the difference between spiritual practitioners and not. How much welcome those thoughts are given. See, in the spiritual practitioner, they're already accepted as just part of my being because they come unbidden. The consciousness in the spiritual practitioner knows that I have a decision to make about them, but they're in themselves not wrong, and I'm not wrong for having them. What I do with them is what I'm responsible for, and which is the basis of karma. What I do with them. How welcome do I make them? And as the Alter Rebbe points out, that we have a strange relationship to thoughts because we use the word comprehend. Comprehend means I can draw a circle around it. And if I can draw a circle around it, I can comprehend it. I can encompass it. And anything that we can think and comprehend, we can encompass. And it feels like we're the boss of it. He says the strange relationship to anything that you comprehend is that it also comprehends you. As you put your mind arms around it, you became absorbed in that thought and it permeated you. You can't comprehend anything without it comprehending you. And so thoughts are like a marinade. Now I assume with the tofu of your mind, you would like to choose your marinade. And they are not all equal to you. If you like tofu. I mean, it doesn't have to be tofu. You can marinate anything. but we don't we don't all enjoy the same marinade. And all marinades are not equal to us. We are marinating in our thoughts, in the thoughts that we entertain. And so he brings us around to this awareness, which gives us a tool on the spiritual path. Which are we going to entertain? Better thoughts? Some are less worthy of us, even if they come naturally. Entertaining them is a different thing. And so that's the critical point of decision when it comes into thought. And around dibur and ma'aseh, word and deed, he'll just want to say, there's a progression. First you think it more, and then you say it. The more you say it, the more likely it is you'll do it. And we often see that with negatives. I saw a clever line in a movie. Some guy said something, and his friend said, I can't believe you said that. He says, I wouldn't even think that. He said, you did think it, and then you said it. You did think it, and then you said it. And as we see today in our world, things that were unsayable before are getting said more often with permission, and then actions are following. We can watch it in the negative, but he wants to say, having watched that in the negative, it'll also work for the positive. You know, as like the thought experiment around joy and generosity that you were making earlier, like more elevated thoughts, more nuanced, beautiful thoughts, more beautiful words, more beautiful actions. And that's where I want to leave this.